Well, good morning. I don't know whether to leave this here or not. Anyway, good morning. It's good to be here. As a gardener, I'm certainly glad to see spring is trying to come out. It's a little better than it has been, and we went through a pretty big ordeal, but we're all glad that we can say we're still here and we're warm and dry. This morning I want to talk about the idea of faith. You know, we have the benefit as people on this side of the printing press, and all of that is included. We have the Bible. We see that we can read the whole thing. We can see God's plans laid out. We can see all that He's planned, all that He interacts with, the things that He's done for people, against people. We can see all of that, and it gives us an advantage in having a true trust and faith in God and Jesus and all of that is concerned with the gospel. I will say those back in that day, they may have had an advantage in the sense that they did see some of the things happen. They saw the miracles. They saw history unfold in front of them. They had parents, grandparents that would tell them the stories of what happened and how it all came about and how they were led or punished or whatever by God. But we can look at the whole Bible, and we can see the things that happened to people, and we can see how they reacted. And I want to look at a few of the men and see how some of them reacted in the situation that came up and what they did, how they reacted, how they dealt with it, and then apply a little bit to ourselves in thinking about how we react, how we act on our faith. In James it says, by my works I'll show you my faith. In other words, if I can have faith, but if my actions don't indicate my faith, then I really don't have the faith. I'm not showing anyone the faith that I am supposed to have. And I want to first read from Hebrews, the 11th chapter, verse 17. It says, by faith Abraham, being tried, offered up Isaac. Yea, he that gladly received the promises was offering up his only begotten, even to whom it was said, in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God is able to raise up even from the dead. You know, we look at Abraham and we see the different times that he went through a change in his life, whether it was moving, whether it was Sarah becoming pregnant, whether it was giving up Isaac. And it says that he offered up Isaac. And if you put yourself in his place, this was the son that he was promised. This was the only son that was going to bring about God's plan. And here it was that God was telling him to offer up Isaac. And we don't know what his mind went through. We can't tell, except that it says in this verse that he accounted that God could even raise up Isaac if he needed to, if that was the plan. But he followed through with what God told him to do up to the point of being ready to kill Isaac. And God stopped him. And we see Abraham as a very faithful man, a man who was given many promises, and he acted on that faith. He did not waver in what God told him to do. Then you have Joseph. You look at Joseph. He was in a little different situation. He hadn't been given a lot of promises, but he knew the stories of his father, grandfather, great-grandfather, all of those, and how Abraham was given those promises, and it came down through to him, but he himself was not given those promises. But when in his life, he acted in the faith that God gave him. God gave him the faith to always do what God would expect of him. He no matter what it was, he didn't waver. He gave God the glory, and he also acted in the way that God wanted him to, no matter what was happening. And he had some rough times to go through. He wasn't given an easy life. And so he did what he was supposed to do through the faith and acting on that faith. On the other side of the coin, we have a couple of guys that we want to mention, and that's Saul. In 1 Samuel, the 15th chapter, we have the story of Saul. He was made king of Israel, and when you think about that idea, he was made king of the greatest nation at the time there in the world that they were in. That he was the king. He was, as it said, head and shoulders above the other men. He was physically impressive. He was made king of Israel. That was an honor. That was a great responsibility. And if you think about it, he had the ability, as king, to tell anyone, anywhere, what to do in the Israelite nation. And it's a little surprising when you read the story of how he was given a direct command from God through Samuel, how that he was to wipe out the Amalekites. The Amalekites had been rough on the Israelites, and God was going to punish them. He was going to wipe them out. And he told Saul to take the Israelites and wipe out everything having to do with the Amalekites. All the people, all the animals, all the stuff, nothing was to be kept, nothing was to be brought back. They were just to wipe everything out. And in the story, in verse 24, Saul says he feared the people and obeyed their voices. And when you think about that, it's hard for me to imagine this king of Israel, as I said, could do anything or tell anyone to do anything, and he feared the people. Now, this is me just supposing, this just me trying to read between the lines, because I doubt physically that he feared any individual. And so he may have feared them not liking him anymore, not wanting him to be king anymore. He may have feared them wanting to replace him. He may have feared that they could rise up and physically harm him as a whole. But it's just a little surprising to see someone say, I feared the people, when he is in charge of all of them. But he did. He said he feared them, and he obeyed what they said rather than what God had told him. Now, again, he was one of those who had seen many things happen. He saw David wipe out or kill Goliath in the battle that Saul was in charge of. He saw things, and he knew God's power. He knew what God could do, and yet, instead of obeying, he listened to the people, and they brought the things back. Here again, I'm supposing probably the people wanted the stuff for themselves, but their words were that they were going to sacrifice them to God. But and then they also brought back Agag, and probably in Saul's mind, that would be a good demonstration, or a good put Agag as an example. Show the world what Israel thought, or what God thought of Agag and the Amalekites. Whatever the case, he didn't obey. He didn't have enough faith, or he didn't act on the faith that he had to obey in this circumstance. And then secondly, we look at Moses. In Numbers, the 20th chapter, in verse 8, he is told to speak to a rock. He's told to give the people of Israel water. They had been wandering a while and they hadn't had water. They were in need of water. They were complaining. They were whining to Moses, as they had continued to do. And God told him, okay, just go to this rock, speak to it, and it'll come forth water, and you can give the people water and give their animals water. But in verse 10, it says, then Moses and Aaron gathered the people together in front of the rock and said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring water out of this rock for you? Again, trying to read between the lines, I can imagine that Moses and Aaron were really kind of fed up, frustrated, irritated by the people. As much as God had done for them all along, and they still whined and complained and acted like they were being mistreated and they weren't going to be taken care of. And I see Moses very irritated, and whether it was through the irritation or the frustration or pride, he said, Aaron and I have to do this. And he went and struck the rock instead of, he hit it with his staff rather than speaking to it as God said. And you can understand his feelings, but again, it showed he didn't act on the faith that he should have had. Whether he had the faith or not, he didn't act on it. And I think this is one of the ideas I get from that is the phrase leap of faith. Faith meaning I know, I'm supposed to know, I should know, I do know that God will take care of me. In this situation, it looks like I have to do something different than what God says, but as a leap of faith, I jump in, I do what God said anyway without regarding the circumstances. God said this is what I should do or not do, and so I do it anyway. And so, we're all here because we believe. We believe in God. We believe in Jesus. We believe in the gospel. We believe in the Bible. We believe in all these things, and we believe in the promises of heaven, the salvation. We believe that our worship here is correct, and we're trying to please God in all these aspects. And we will defend these when we need to or have to, and show the world that we do believe in all that we're doing or that we profess to believe. But I think there are times in our lives when circumstances come up, just like Abraham, Joseph, Moses, Saul. They had circumstances, and they had to deal with them. Did they deal with them in the right way? 2 of them did, 2 of them didn't. And I think we can see that in our life, when things happen, instead of obeying, sometimes we get in the habit of thinking, well, I know better, or it won't matter in this case. I think God may not understand what's going on here, or I think I can see a better way, or something along that line. And Jeremiah says it's not in man to direct his own steps, and that's the crux of what I'm getting at. God knows what's best for us, and he tells us what we need to do or not do, how we need to feel, how we need to believe, and how we need to trust. And I think we can look at a few things that, and there are so many in the Bible, I wouldn't even begin to try to list everything that we need to just obey without question, without losing or lacking in faith. And we don't want to be like Saul and fear what other people say. Many times the world or our group or our friends, our schoolmates, whatever, will think this is the good thing to do, even though we know it's not. And we can't be swayed by their opinions. one of the things that God has told us, and it's, again, this is not easy. This is something that we all have to deal with. We have to try to really place in our minds in the right way. And it's Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. We know that verse. We've heard that verse many times. And we know that it's true, that God has promised that whatever is happening, whatever goes on in our lives, is for our own good. It will work out for the good. That particular thing may not be great. It may not be feels good at that time, but it will work out together. That's hard. That's a hard thing to process. I think it's interesting that if you think about when we have someone we know or in our family or in our congregation who has died, it's kind of easy for us to say, well, God had a plan. It's already happened. We don't have to make a decision. So it's easy to say God had a plan. And it's true. Whatever happened, it's in God's plan. But that's an easy one because it's out of our control. The other things that happen in our life, we have to have the ability to act in our faith that we know that it will all be okay once we see the big picture. In Philippians, the 4th chapter, and verse 6, it says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God." Along the same lines, but he says thanksgiving. It's hard to thank God for everything that comes along, but he does say, don't be anxious, don't be worried, don't fear what's coming, because God will have that, and pray about it so that God knows what we're thinking, what we're asking for. He does answer prayer, and he will allow things to happen in his plan that will work out for our good. And then next, I'm just going to read a few verses of things that apply to each of us in different ways, but are a little more direct to our physical life here, a little more to our actions on a daily basis. In Colossians, the 3rd chapter, and verse 18, it says, "Wives, submit unto your own husbands as it is fit in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and be not bitter against them. Children, obey your parents in all things." I think these are some of the hardest ones for all of us because it's a daily thing. It's a daily issue, or I won't say issue, but it's a daily act. It's a daily living that we have to deal with. Wives and husbands won't always agree. Wives and husbands will at times be at odds. We will not always be happy about each other. And so these ideas of submitting even in bad times, that's a hard thing. It's hard for husbands to love as they should, because that's an act. That's doing the right thing, and not be bitter, not hold things against their wives when things don't match up, when our ideas don't match up. And for you kids out there, obey your parents in all things. Yes, we're old and we don't understand very many things, but God said, obey your parents. He knows what's best. He made us. He knows what we all need to do. And children, obey your parents in the Lord, because it will help you in the long run to not only obey your parents, but you'll learn to obey those in authority, which God has told us in Romans 13 to do that as well. And it will help you to understand and learn how to obey God and His commands. Even though you may not think any of us understand what you're going through or how it's happening. Generally, we do. It's, when I grew up, it wasn't. I don't think it was as hard to go through junior high and high school. Oh, we had the social issues like everybody does, but the drugs and alcohol and all that, I don't think it was nearly as bad as it is now. But we still had to deal with it. So we do understand many things. And then in Romans, the 12th chapter, there's quite a few different things that you might pick out and say, do I really have enough faith? Do I act on my faith enough? Do I take the leap of faith to do it anyway, even though it may be uncomfortable, even though it may not make sense to you at the time? But it says, bless those who persecute you. It's hard to want to be kind to someone who's mistreating you, and maybe it's someone who's out for you and just trying to ruin you in some way. But you bless them. You don't, and later on it says, overcome evil with good. Same thing, same idea. Don't give in to the anger, the frustration, the will, if you will, of us wanting to repay. God, Paul says that God will repay those who deserve punishment. Blessing our enemies is just kind of against our nature, and it takes, as I said, as I was talking about earlier, a leap of faith. Just do the right thing, as God has said, and you will be blessed. And in blessing those who persecute you, you do have a chance of affecting them in the right way. Then he also says, associate with the lowly. We all are prone to looking for those who are like ourselves. We like people who do the same things, believe the same ways, same state, if you will, of economy or social ideas, whatever. But it says associate with the lowly, those who are not as well off in whatever way that might mean. And again, it may take a leap of faith to just jump away from our crowd into someone else's group and act the right way. But again, God has a purpose. God has a plan. God wants us to do those things so that He will not only will it benefit those you're associating with, but it will also glorify God in what you do and giving Him the glory for your life. We see where Joseph and Abraham were benefited. They were blessed by having done exactly what God had told them to do. Both of them became mighty, great, wealthy, you name it. Not all because, but because they did benefit themselves by obeying God. And God did bless them because of their obedience and their faith. In Revelation, the 21st chapter, and verse 8, a part of that verse says, cowards and unbelievers, their place will be the lake that burns with fire. He lists some other things that we recognize as evil, as not good. But he says cowards and unbelievers, those that don't believe or don't have enough faith, don't act in the right way according to God's plan, they will be punished. God says this. It's a statement. It's not a give or take. It is something that God has said will happen. And so we have to be very clear with ourselves that when we don't act in faith, we are treading on thin ice. We're putting ourselves in a position of not obeying and being punished. in the end for our unbelief. Now, when we look back at Saul and Moses, there is the verses go on to tell what God had to say about each of them. In 1 Samuel 15th chapter, verse 25, Saul says to Samuel, "Now please forgive my sin. Go back with me so I can worship the Lord." And Samuel said to Saul, "I will not go back with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel." And then Moses, in Numbers the 20th chapter, verse 12, it says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to show me as holy before the Israelites. Therefore you will not bring them into the land I have given them." He was to die before they crossed over the Jordan. God was very clear with each one of them what to do, and they disobeyed. They took on themselves a different idea. They didn't have enough faith to just obey without question. And they were both rejected by God. Now, they were not rejected as people, as His children, but they were punished. They did have consequences for their unbelief. Saul was no longer was going to have the kingdom taken away from him, and as I said, Moses didn't get to go over the Jordan with them. And if we look at ourselves and we consider what we really believe, if we really believe that all that we are doing, all that we have said we do, all the belief in God, Jesus, the gospel, all of that, if we do believe it, we need to act on our faith. And acting, as I said, takes a leap sometimes. We have to go beyond our own thinking. We have to look to what God has said and trust that what He has said will be true and will be the case. It will benefit us in the end for having obeyed. God is serious about our faith. He wants us to believe. He wants us to trust without question. These men didn't obey Saul and Moses, but they were not rejected, as I said, by God as His people, but they were rejected from. They did have their consequences, and we have consequences too sometimes. If we act in unbelief, if we do the wrong thing, sometimes it will cause us to have consequences that may excuse me, may last a day or two, may last years, we don't know. But because of Jesus and because of the gospel, we have the ability to be forgiven, whether it's in obedience to the gospel or whether it's having obeyed the gospel and having done something later in our lives that we regret, that we are sorrowful, that we repent. We can be forgiven. As I said, there may be consequences, but God has promised to forgive us. He has promised that, and we need to have trust, have faith in that He will forgive us and that we can still have the salvation that He promised. That's all I have to say this morning. I hope I've encouraged you in some way to act on the faith that we should have and try to build up your faith through the Word, continue reading the Word, continue trusting that the Word is what God wants us to know and what God wants us to do.